The summer sun hung low over Willow Creek, Virginia, casting a golden haze across the sleepy town in July 1952. Emily Harper jolted awake in her childhood bedroom, her heart pounding like a war drum. Sweat beaded on her forehead, not from the heat, but from memories that didn't belong to this moment. Memories of a life already lived, a life that ended in 1975. She was 25 again, her body young and strong, but her mind carried the weight of decades of betrayal and pain. In her past life, she had been engaged to James Carter, a charming man with a smile that could melt hearts. But that charm hid a coward's soul. When the Korean War draft called him, James faked his death, leaving Emily to face his manipulative family alone. His mother, Margaret Carter, and sister, Lily Carter, convinced her she was cursed responsible for his demise and forced her into servitude for over 20 years. On her deathbed, as her vision faded, Emily learned the truth. James was alive, married to another woman, and laughing at her suffering. But as her life slipped away, a voice ethereal like a whisper from the stars spoke to her. You will have another chance, right the wrongs, find your justice. Now reborn 6 months after James's supposed death, Emily sat on the edge of her creaky bed, the familiar quilt beneath her fingers, grounding her in this new reality. The voice's promise echoed in her mind, a divine gift, or perhaps a curse of its own. She didn't question it. She knew she wouldn't waste it. Her eyes, once dulled by grief, now burned with purpose. She wouldn't let the Carters destroy her again. This time she would build a new life, marry a man who truly loved her, and make James and his family pay for their cruelty. The town of Willow Creek, with its gossiping neighbors and dusty streets, would be her stage. She thought of Daniel Brooks, the textile mill manager who had loved her quietly in her past life. She had rejected him in that life, manipulated by the Carters' lies. Now she would seek him out, propose marriage, and start anew. But first she needed to break free from the Carters' grip. Emily stood, catching her reflection in the cracked mirror above her dresser. Her face was unlined, her brown eyes fierce with determination. She wasn't the broken woman of 1975 anymore. She was reborn, and this time she would write her own story. The Carters had spread rumors that she was cursed, a woman doomed to bring death to those she loved. Margaret had screamed it in the town square, and Lily had whispered it to every matchmaker, ensuring Emily remained alone. But Emily knew the truth now. James hadn't died in a tragic accident. He had fled to avoid the draft and their engagement. He had built a new life with a woman named Clara, leaving Emily to bear the weight of his lies. The memory of his mocking laughter as she lay dying fueled her resolve. She would expose him, humiliate his family, and reclaim her happiness. As she dressed in a simple cotton dress, Emily's mind raced with plans. She would confront Margaret and Lily, refuse their demands, and publicly dismantle their lies. The town would see them for what they were, greedy, manipulative opportunists. But she needed to be strategic. In her past life, she had been naive, easily swayed by guilt. Now she was a woman forged in betrayal's fire. She would use her knowledge of James's deception to trap him, forging letters in his handwriting, a skill she had honed in her past life to cope with her loneliness. Those letters would reveal his desertion and mock his family's reliance on her servitude. But first, she needed to secure her future with Daniel. Emily stepped outside, the warm Virginia air thick with the scent of honeysuckle. Willow Creek buzzed with its usual rhythm, farmers hauling goods to market, children chasing each other down dirt paths, and women gossiping on porches. She passed the general store where old Mr. Thompson was sweeping the steps. "Morning, Emily," he called, his voice warm but tinged with pity. The town still saw her as the tragic fiancé of a fallen hero. She smiled tightly, knowing their pity would soon turn to shock. As she walked, she imagined sharing her story with the world, a tale of betrayal and triumph that would resonate far beyond Willow Creek. It would be worth telling if her journey could inspire even one person to stand up to their own betrayers. She pictured a crowd gathered around a flickering screen, hanging on her every word, clicking to cheer her on, leaving comments to share their stories of resilience, and subscribing to hear more tales of justice. The thought made her smile. She wasn't just rewriting her life, but crafting a legacy. Her first stop was the Carter house, a sagging farmhouse on the edge of town. Margaret would be there, ready to berate her for some imagined slight. Emily's stomach churned, not with fear but with anticipation. She knocked, and the door swung open to reveal Margaret, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Emily. You're late, Margaret snapped, clutching a bowl of lukewarm soup. This is cold as death, just like your cursed heart. Emily would have apologized, dropped to her knees, and begged forgiveness in her past life. But now she stood tall, her voice steady. If it's cold, heat it yourself, she said, her words sharp as a blade. I'm done being your maid. Margaret's mouth fell open, and Emily felt a surge of power. This was just the beginning. She would marry Daniel, expose James, and watch the Carters crumble. The voice that granted her rebirth had given her a second chance, and she would seize it with both hands, ready to rewrite her destiny and claim her revenge. Emily Harper stood in the dusty yard of the Carter house, the summer heat pressing against her skin as she faced Margaret Carter's stunned silence. It was July 1952, and Emily was reborn, carrying the scars of a past life that ended in 1975. The memory of that life was vivid, a tapestry of pain woven with threads of betrayal. In that life, she had been engaged to James Carter, the golden boy of Willow Creek, Virginia, whose easy smile and quick wit had won her heart. They had planned a simple wedding, dreaming of a quiet life together. But in 1951, the Korean War draft came, and James was called to serve. He left with promises to return, but weeks later word came that he had died in a tragic accident, fallen from a cliff while stationed in a distant training camp. The news shattered Emily, leaving her drowning in grief. Margaret Carter, James's mother, and Lily, his 16-year-old sister, were quick to exploit her sorrow. They first welcomed Emily's help and were grateful for her casseroles and cleaning. But their gratitude turned to venom when a neighbor suggested setting Emily up on a date a year later. Margaret slapped her, screaming that Emily's cursed fate had killed James. "Your bad luck," she hissed, her voice trembling with false piety. "You owe us your life to atone for his death." With her tear-streaked face, Lily chimed in, accusing Emily of betraying James's memory. Confused and heartbroken, Emily believed them. She swore never to marry, moved into the Carter house, and became their servant. For over 20 years, she scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and mended clothes, her health fading under their relentless abuse. Margaret's sharp tongue and Lily's mocking laughter became her daily torment. She ate scraps, slept on a cot in the attic, and watched her youth slip away, believing she was honoring James's memory. The truth came on her deathbed in 1975 as Emily lay frail and coughing in the Carters' dim living room. The door burst open, and James walked in alive, healthy, and accompanied by a beautiful woman named Clara and 3 young sons. Emily's heart stopped, not from illness, but from shock. Seeing her skeletal form, James froze, then turned to Margaret and Lily. "You said she was dead," he said, his voice laced with annoyance. Lily laughed, her eyes glinting with cruelty. "She's been our maid all these years, brother. I wanted her to know the truth before she croaked. Makes it more fun." Clara, the woman at James's side, smirked. "It's poetic, really. Destroying her spirit like this, it's better than any revenge." James joined their laughter, calling Emily a fool for believing he was dead. He admitted he had faked his death to dodge the draft and avoid marrying her, choosing Clara, a nurse who helped him forge the accident report. They had built a new life in Richmond, living off veteran benefits fraudulently claimed in his name. Emily's rage burned, but her body failed her. As her vision darkened, the mysterious voice spoke, promising her a second chance. Now reborn in 1952, Emily stood before Margaret, the memory of that betrayal fueling her defiance. She knew James was alive, hiding in Richmond with Clara and sending letters to his family to ensure Emily's servitude. Those letters, which she had found and read in her past life, detailed his new life and mocked her gullibility. Emily had spent hours copying his handwriting, desperate to feel close to him. That skill would now be her weapon. Margaret recovered from her shock, her face twisting with fury. "You ungrateful girl," she spat, clutching the soup bowl. "James died because of you, and now you dare speak to me like this." Emily's lips curled into a cold smile. "If James's fate was so weak that I caused his death, maybe he wasn't worth mourning." The words hit like a slap, and Margaret staggered back, her hand trembling. Lily, hovering in the doorway, gasped. "How could you say that about my brother?" she cried, her voice breaking with practiced tears. But Emily saw through the act. In her past life, Lily's tears had manipulated her. Now they were just noise. Emily turned to leave, but not before glancing at the neighbors gathered at the fence, their eyes wide with curiosity. They had heard Margaret's accusations before and pitied Emily as the cursed fiancé. Now they saw her stand tall, and whispers of approval rippled through the crowd. "She's done enough for them," one woman muttered. "Let her live her life," said another. Emily didn't linger to hear more. She had plans to make. Daniel Brooks, the man who had loved her in her past life, was her next step. Daniel had been a steady presence in that life, a widower who ran the textile mill with quiet strength. He had courted her after James's death, but Margaret and Lily's threats drove her to reject him. She wouldn't make that mistake again. As she returned to her small house, Emily's mind churned with strategy. She would marry Daniel, expose James's deception, and dismantle the Carters' hold over her. The town's gossip would turn against them, and James's return, when she orchestrated it, would be their undoing. She thought of Clara, the nurse who had enabled James's lie. Clara had been a shadowy figure in her past life, her role limited to a cruel smirk. Now Emily wondered about her motives. Had Clara loved James, or was she complicit in his scheme for her own gain? The question lingered, but Emily pushed it aside. Her focus was on justice, and she would start by reclaiming her heart with Daniel, then setting a trap for James that would shatter the Carters' world. Emily Harper stood in the Carter family's cluttered kitchen, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and unwashed dishes. It was July 1952 in Willow Creek, Virginia, and the summer heat did little to soften the chill of Margaret Carter's glare. Margaret James Carter's mother clutched a bowl of soup, her thin lips curling as she berated Emily. "This is scalding hot, you careless girl, trying to burn me to death just like you cursed my James to his grave." Her voice was a whip sharp and practiced, meant to cut Emily down to the submissive girl she had been in her past life. In that life, which ended in 1975, Emily had crumbled under such accusations, believing she was responsible for James's supposed death in a military accident. For over 20 years, she had served Margaret and her daughter Lily as a maid, her spirit broken by their lies. But now reborn 6 months after James's faked death, Emily was no longer that naive girl. She caught her reflection in a chipped mirror on the wall, her brown eyes fierce, her jaw set with resolve. The sight steadied her, a reminder of the mysterious voice that had granted her the second chance, whispering of justice as she died. "If you don't like the soup, make your own," Emily said, her voice low but firm, each word a deliberate step away from her past subservience. Margaret's eyes widened, her hand trembling so violently that soup sloshed onto the floor. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she hissed, stepping closer, her frail frame belying the venom in her tone. "You killed my son with your cursed fate, and now you disrespect his memory." Emily would have dropped to her knees in her past life, tears streaming as she begged forgiveness. But the memory of James's betrayal, his mocking laughter as he stood alive with his new wife Clara and their sons, burned away any trace of guilt. Emily straightened, meeting Margaret's gaze without flinching. "If James died because of me, then his fate was weaker than a summer breeze," she said, her words slicing through the air. "I never married him, Margaret. He was gone before we could. So why am I the one slaving for you while you spread lies about curses?" Her voice rose, not with anger, but with a clarity that felt like freedom. Margaret staggered back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For the first time, she had no retort, no scripture-quoted venom to hurl. Emily's heart pounded, not with fear but with triumph. This was the spark of her defiance when she began reclaiming her life. Lily, hovering in the doorway, stepped forward, her teenage face contorted with feigned grief. "How can you be so cruel, Emily?" she cried, her voice breaking in a way that had once tugged at Emily's heart. "My brother loved you, and now you're turning your back on us." Lily's tears had been a weapon in her past life, manipulating Emily into years of servitude. Now Emily saw them for what they were, a performance. She crossed her arms, her lips curling into a faint smile. "If James loved me so much, why didn't you and your mother care for me after he was gone? Why was I the one scrubbing your floors while you called me cursed?" Lily's tears faltered, her eyes darting to Margaret for support. But Margaret was still reeling, her silence a crack in the armor of their control. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, drawn by Margaret's earlier shouting. Their murmurs drifted through the open window: Mrs. Jenkins from the bakery, old Mr. Thompson from the general store, and others who had pitied Emily as the tragic fiancé of a fallen hero. Now they saw her stand tall, and their whispers shifted. "She's right," Mrs. Jenkins said softly. "Emily's done more than enough for them." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Margaret's got no right to keep her chained." The support bolstered Emily, but she didn't need it to stand firm. She had spent her life seeking approval, believing she owed the Carters her existence. Now she owed them nothing but the truth. Emily's thoughts drifted to Daniel Brooks, the man she would marry in this life. In her past life, Daniel, the widower who managed Willow Creek's textile mill, had loved her quietly, respecting her devotion to James. After James's death, he courted her, and his gentle kindness starkly contrasted with the Carters' cruelty. But Margaret and Lily had stormed his workplace accusing Emily of disloyalty, and she, drained by their abuse, had rejected him. The memory of his heartbroken eyes haunted her. She wouldn't let that happen again. Daniel deserved better, and so did she. But first she needed to ensure the Carters could no longer control her. "I'm done here," Emily said, turning toward the door. "You can spread your superstitious nonsense, but I'm not your maid anymore." Margaret found her voice, her words a desperate snarl. "You'll regret this, Emily Harper. No man will touch you with that curse on your soul." Emily paused her hand on the doorknob and looked back. "If I'm cursed, Margaret, why are you living in a pigsty without me?" The neighbors chuckled, and Margaret's face flushed red with humiliation. Lily rushed to her mother's side, but Emily didn't wait for their response. She stepped into the sunlight, her heart racing with exhilaration and fear. This was her first victory, but the war was far from over. She would marry Daniel, expose James's deception, and watch the Carters' lies crumble. As she walked away, the weight of her past life lifted, replaced by a fierce determination to rewrite her future. The days following Emily Harper's confrontation with Margaret Carter were a whirlwind of whispers in Willow Creek. By mid-July 1952, the town was abuzz with tales of Emily's defiance, the once meek fiancé, who had stood up to the formidable Margaret. Emily stayed home, avoiding the Carters' farmhouse and the curious stares of neighbors. Her small cottage, with its peeling paint and overgrown garden, felt like a sanctuary as she planned her next steps. In her past life, which ended in 1975, she had been manipulated by Margaret and Lily Carter, who convinced her she was cursed for causing James Carter's supposed death. For over 20 years, she had served them, her health and spirit eroded by their abuse. The truth that James had faked his death to evade the Korean War draft and married Clara in Richmond had shattered her as she lay dying. Now reborn with a second chance, Emily was determined to break free and build a life with Daniel Brooks, the man she had rejected in her past life. Her thoughts often turned to Daniel, the textile mill manager, whose quiet strength had drawn her even in her grief-stricken past. In that life, Daniel had been a widower, his wife lost to pneumonia before Emily met him. He had courted her patiently, bringing her wildflowers and offering to fix her leaky roof. But Margaret and Lily's threats, accusing her of betraying James, had driven her to push him away. The memory of his pained expression still stung, a reminder of her own weakness. Now she would make it right. She had already visited Daniel, blurting out a proposal that surprised them both. "Will you marry me?" she had asked, her voice trembling with the weight of her past regrets. Daniel, his blue eyes warm with understanding, had nodded, and they registered their marriage that day at the county courthouse. The act felt like a promise not just to Daniel, but to herself, to live without fear. But the Carters weren't done with her. Emily knew they would fight to keep her under their thumb, spreading rumors to isolate her. Sure enough, Lily appeared at her door one muggy afternoon, her face streaked with crocodile tears. "Emily, how could you abandon us?" she sobbed, clutching a handkerchief. "Mom and I have been lost without you. We miss you so much." Emily leaned against the doorframe, her expression unyielding. In her past life, Lily's tears had guilted her into compliance, but now she saw the manipulation for what it was. "Miss me," Emily said, her voice dry. "Or miss the maid who cooked your meals and washed your clothes?" Lily's tears faltered, her eyes narrowing. "That's not fair," she said. "You loved James. You loved us. How can you walk away?" Emily stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her to keep Lily out. "If I loved James, why didn't you and your mother care for me after he died? Why was I the one slaving while you called me cursed?" Her words were calm but sharp, cutting through Lily's act. Lily's face flushed, and she tried a new tack. "James worked so hard to make you proud and be a war hero. That's why he died. It's only been 6 months and you're already turning your back on him. How can he rest in peace?" Emily laughed, a cold sound that startled Lily. "Funny, I remember James saying he joined the army to prove he was a man, not for me. And if he loved me, why didn't you think about how he'd feel seeing me treated like dirt?" The neighbors, drawn by Lily's loud sobbing, gathered at a distance, their murmurs a soft hum. Mrs. Jenkins, wiping flour from her hands, nodded at Emily's words. "She's got a point," she whispered to Mr. Thompson. "The Carters treated her like a servant." Emily didn't need their approval, but it strengthened her resolve. Lily, sensing the tide turning, tried to guilt her further. "You're just picking a fight because you want to marry someone else," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. In her past life, such words would have shamed Emily into silence. Now she met Lily's gaze squarely. "Of course I want to marry," she said. "I want a husband who loves me, a family, a life. Why shouldn't I? You and your mother don't get to decide my future." Lily's mouth opened, but no words came. Emily pressed her advantage. "Your mother remarried 6 months after her first husband died, didn't she? Moved right into the Carter family, so why am I expected to mourn James forever?" The neighbors' murmurs grew louder, their sympathy shifting firmly to Emily. Lily's face burned red, and she stammered, "That's different, Mom had to." Emily cut her off. "It's not different. I've done my duty. I'm not your mule anymore." She turned and walked back into her cottage, slamming the door. Lily stood frozen, her tears drying as her plan crumbled. Inside, Emily's heart raced not with fear but with exhilaration. Confronting Lily had been a test, and she had passed, but her mind was already on the larger battle. She knew James was alive, hiding in Richmond, with Clara living off fraudulent veteran benefits. In her past life, she had found his letters to Margaret and Lily boasting of his new life and urging them to keep Emily in line. Those letters had broken her, but now they were her weapon. She had spent hours in her past life mimicking James's handwriting, a desperate act to feel close to him. Soon she would use that skill to forge letters exposing his desertion, planting them where they would be found. But first she needed to solidify her bond with Daniel. That evening, Emily walked to the textile mill where Daniel finished his shift. The mill's hum filled the air, a reminder of Willow Creek's heartbeat. Daniel greeted her with a warm smile, his calloused hands gentle as he took hers. He said, "You look like you've been through a storm," his voice soft and concerned. Emily hesitated, her past life's guilt surfacing. "I faced Lily today," she admitted. "I'm scared, Daniel, not of them, but of failing to be the woman I want to be." Daniel's eyes softened. "You're already her," he said. "You're stronger than you know." His words eased her fears, and as they walked home under the stars, Emily felt a flicker of hope. She would marry Daniel Trap James and watch the Carter's lies unravel her past life's pain, fueling her fight for a new beginning. The twilight sky over Willow Creek, Virginia, glowed a soft purple as Emily Harper walked toward the textile mill, her boots crunching on the gravel path. It was late July 1952, and the humid air clung to her skin, but her heart felt lighter than it had in decades. In her past life, which ended in 1975, she had been a shadow broken by the lies of James Carter, her fiancé, who faked his death to dodge the Korean War draft. His mother Margaret and sister Lily had manipulated her into believing she was cursed, forcing her into servitude for over 20 years. On her deathbed, she learned James was alive, married to Clara, a nurse who helped him stage his accident and mocking her suffering. A mysterious voice had granted her rebirth, whispering of justice as she died. And now, 6 months after James's supposed death, Emily was determined to rewrite her story. Her recent confrontations with Margaret and Lily had sparked her defiance, but today she sought a different kind of victory love. Her destination was Daniel Brooks, the textile mill manager, who had loved her in her past life. Daniel, a widower at 32, had been a quiet beacon of kindness in her previous existence. His wife Sarah had died of pneumonia 3 years before Emily met him, leaving him to raise their young daughter Anna alone until she passed from illness at age 5. The loss had carved a quiet strength into Daniel, his blue eyes carrying grief and resilience. In her past life, after James's death, Daniel had courted her with small gestures, fixing her fence, bringing her wildflowers, listening to her sorrows. But Margaret and Lily's relentless accusations of disloyalty had driven Emily to reject him, her heart too heavy with guilt to accept his love. The memory of his pained expression as she turned him away haunted her, a wound as deep as James's betrayal. Standing outside the mill, Emily felt a tremor of fear, not of the Carters, but of herself. Could she be the woman Daniel deserved, free from the shadows of her past? The mill's rhythmic hum steadied her, a reminder of Willow Creek's heartbeat. She smoothed her cotton dress, her fingers lingering on the fabric she had chosen for its simplicity, contrasting with the ornate gowns Margaret had once demanded she mend. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, the scent of cotton dust and machine oil filling her lungs. Daniel was at his desk, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his brow furrowed over a ledger. He looked up and his face softened into a smile that warmed her core. "Emily," he said, standing. "Didn't expect you so soon." His voice was gentle, but his eyes searched hers, sensing the weight she carried. "I needed to see you," Emily said, her voice catching. She hesitated, the words she had rehearsed faltering under the intensity of his gaze. In her past life, she had been too broken to accept his love. Now she feared she might not be whole enough to offer hers. Daniel, She swallowed her throat tight. Will you marry me? The question burst out raw and unpolished, surprising them both. Daniel's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his calloused hand brushing hers. Emily, are you sure? He asked, his voice low. Not because I don't want to, but because I know you've been through hell. His honesty disarmed her, and for a moment she saw the man who had waited for her in her past life, never marrying after her rejection. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of her second chance. I'm sure, she said, her voice steadier. In my heart, I've always known you were good, Daniel. I was too blind to see it before. I want a life with you, a real one. She didn't mention her rebirth, the voice, or the decades of pain she couldn't not yet. But Daniel's nod was enough, his eyes shining with joy and resolve. Then let's do it, he said. Today. They walked to the county courthouse, a modest brick building in the town square, and registered their marriage under the watchful eyes of a clerk who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The act was simple, but to Emily it was a vow to herself to live without fear, to love without guilt. As they left the courthouse, Daniel took her hand, his grip warm and sure. What's next, Emily? He asked, a hint of a smile on his lips. She looked at him, her heart swelling with a hope she hadn't felt in 2 lifetimes. We plan a wedding, she said, a real one with flowers and music. But first, I need to finish something. She didn't elaborate, but her mind was on the Carters. Margaret and Lily spread rumors calling her cursed to keep her isolated. She knew James was alive, hiding in Richmond, with Clara living off fraudulent veteran benefits. In her past life, she had found his letters to his family boasting of his new life and urging them to guilt her into servitude. Those letters were her weapon now, and she would use her skill at mimicking his handwriting to forge evidence of his deception. Emily began sewing a wedding dress at her cottage, her needle moving with purpose. Each stitch was a step toward her new life and a reminder of her plan. She would confront the Carters again, plant the forged letters, and lure James back to Willow Creek. The town's gossip would turn against them, and Daniel's unwavering support would anchor her. As she worked, she thought of Clara, the nurse who had helped James fake his death. Clara had been a fleeting figure in her past life, her smirk a cruel punctuation to Emily's pain. Emily wondered about her motives. Had she loved James, or was she a willing accomplice in his scheme? The question lingered, but Emily pushed it aside. Her focus was on Daniel, and her revenge a fire burning brighter each day. Emily Harper sat at her kitchen table, the flickering light of a single lamp casting shadows on the walls of her cottage. It was early August 1952, and Willow Creek slept under a blanket of stars, but Emily's mind was restless. Her marriage to Daniel Brooks, registered just days ago, was a beacon of hope, but her past life ended in 1975 loomed like a storm cloud. In that life, her fiancé, James Carter, had faked his death to escape the Korean War draft, leaving her to the mercy of his mother Margaret and sister Lily. They had convinced her she was cursed, responsible for his supposed death in a military accident, and forced her into servitude for over 20 years. On her deathbed, she learned the truth. James was alive, married to Clara, a nurse who helped him stage the accident, and laughing at her suffering. A mysterious voice had granted her rebirth, and now 6 months after James's death, Emily was plotting her revenge. Her recent confrontations with Margaret and Lily had freed her from their immediate grip, but she knew they were spreading rumors, calling her a cursed woman, doomed to bring death to any man she loved. The town's matchmakers had already turned their backs, declaring her unmarriageable, but Emily didn't care about their whispers. She had Daniel now, and their wedding was planned, a simple ceremony at the town church with wildflowers and a small gathering of friends. Yet her mind was on James, the man who had betrayed her. She had discovered his letters to Margaret and Lily in her past life, hidden in a tin box under the farmhouse floorboards. Those letters revealed his life in Richmond, where he lived under the alias John Reynolds, working odd jobs and claiming veteran benefits fraudulently. Clara, his wife, had been his accomplice, forging documents to support his death and secure their new life. Emily closed her eyes, the memories vivid. James had fled Willow Creek in 1951, days after receiving his draft notice. He had promised to write and return, but met Clara, a nurse at a Richmond hospital, instead. She had connections, access to medical records, and a willingness to bend the rules. Together, they staged an accident, a supposed fall from a cliff during a training exercise complete with a forged death certificate. James's letters to his family were smug boasting of his new life and urging Margaret and Lily to keep Emily in line. "She's an idiot," he wrote in one letter Emily had memorized. "Scold her enough and she'll serve you forever." The words had broken her in her past life, but now they fueled her resolve. She had spent hours copying his handwriting, desperate to feel close to him. That skill would now be her weapon. Opening her eyes, Emily pulled a sheet of paper from a drawer, her hands steady as she began to forge a letter in James's scrawl. "Dear Mom and Lily," she wrote, mimicking his arrogant tone. "I'm doing fine in Richmond. The hero story's holding up, so you're set with the benefits. I married Clara. She's pregnant and she's probably a boy. Keep Emily under control. She's too dumb to suspect anything. Burn this." She wrote another, then another, each detailing his desertion and mocking her servitude. These letters would be planted in the Carter house evidence to expose James when the time was right. But first, she needed to lure him back to Willow Creek. Emily's thoughts turned to Clara, who had enabled James's deception. In her past life, Clara had been a shadow, her role limited to a cruel laugh as Emily lay dying. Now Emily wondered about her. Had Clara loved James, or was she drawn to the thrill of his scheme? The letters suggested she was complicit, enjoying the benefits of their fraud. Emily imagined Clara as a calculating woman, her nurse's uniform a mask for ambition. Perhaps she had seen James as a ticket to a better life, or maybe she relished the power of their secret. Either way, Clara's fate was tied to James's, and Emily would ensure they both faced the consequences. Emily's heart ached with anger and sorrow as she sealed the forged letters. Her past life's pain was a constant companion, but so was her hope for the future. Daniel's support was her anchor. That morning he had stopped by with a bouquet of daisies, his smile easing her fears. "You're planning something, aren't you?" he had asked, his tone gentle but knowing. Emily nodded, unwilling to share the truth about her rebirth or scheme. "Just trust me," she said, and he had squeezed her hand, his faith unwavering. She thought of their wedding now set for next week and the life they would build. But first she needed to confront the Carters again, to plant the letters and set her trap. Emily stood, slipping the letters into her pocket. She would visit the Carter house tomorrow, pretending to reconcile and leave the evidence where it would be found. The town's gossip would do the rest, turning against the Carters when James returned. She thought of Colonel Richard Hayes, a war veteran and friend of Daniel's late father, who would attend their wedding. His presence would ensure James's desertion was exposed, a final blow to the Carters' lies. As she blew out the lamp, the darkness felt like a promise. Emily was no longer the broken woman of her past life. She was a force reborn to claim justice and love, and she would not falter. The August sun beat down on Willow Creek, Virginia, turning the dirt roads to dust under Emily Harper's boots. It was 1952, and the air hummed with cicadas, but Emily's mind was a storm of calculation. In her past life, which ended in 1975, she had been a broken woman, enslaved by the lies of James Carter, her fiancé who faked his death to dodge the Korean War draft. His mother Margaret and sister Lily had branded her cursed, forcing her into servitude for over 20 years. On her deathbed, she learned James was alive, married to Clara, a nurse who aided his deception and mocking her suffering. A mysterious voice had granted her rebirth, whispering of justice, and now 6 months after James's supposed death, Emily was a woman reborn with purpose. Her recent confrontations with Margaret and Lily had shattered their hold over her, and her marriage to Daniel Brooks, the textile mill manager, was a beacon of hope. But her revenge was far from complete. Emily clutched a small bundle of forged letters in her pocket, each meticulously crafted in James's handwriting, a skill she had honed in her past life to cope with her loneliness. The letters, detailing his desertion and life in Richmond with Clara, were her weapon to expose him. She planned to plant them in the Carter house, where they would be found when James returned. But first she needed an excuse to enter their home without arousing suspicion. Lily's recent visit, tearfully begging Emily to return, had given her the perfect opening. Emily had rebuffed her, exposing their reliance on her as a maid, but she knew Lily would try again. The Carters' desperation was her leverage. As Emily approached her cottage, the screen door creaked open, and Lily stood there, her face a mask of practiced grief. "Emily, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Mom's a wreck since you left. We need you. See her just once." Such tears had chained Emily to the Carters' will in her past life. Now she saw the manipulation for what it was, and a cold smile played on her lips. She let her shoulders slump, feigning reluctance. "Delicate Lily," she said, her voice soft but calculated. "I'll come. But this is the last time." Lily's eyes lit with triumph, believing she had won. Emily followed her to the Carter farmhouse, her heart steady despite the memories of her past life's torment, scrubbing floors, enduring Margaret's slaps, and swallowing Lily's taunts. The farmhouse was a disaster, a testament to the Carters' dependence on Emily. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, laundry overflowed from baskets, and dust coated every surface. The once tidy yard was littered with leaves, and the stove was caked with grease. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, her gray hair disheveled, her scowl deeper than ever. "So you've crawled back," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Took you long enough to realize your place." Emily bit back a retort, her eyes scanning the room for the perfect spot to hide her letters. She noticed a loose floorboard near the pantry, a place she had discovered where Margaret hid her essential papers in her past life. It was perfect. "I'm not here to stay," Emily said, keeping her tone neutral. "I came to see if you're all right, but this place—" She gestured at the mess, her voice trailing off. "Looks like you need a maid, not a daughter-in-law." Margaret's face flushed, and she slammed her hand on the table. "Don't you dare mock us. You owe us for James's death," Lily chimed in, her voice shrill. "You loved him, Emily. How can you abandon his family?" Emily's chest tightened, not with guilt, but with the weight of her past life's pain. She thought of Daniel, his warm hand in hers at the courthouse, and the wedding they were planning. She wouldn't let the Carters pull her back. "I don't owe you anything," Emily said, her voice rising. "James is gone and I've mourned enough. You treated me like dirt, and I'm done." She moved toward the pantry, pretending to inspect the mess, and knelt by the floorboard. With a glance to ensure Margaret and Lily were distracted by their anger, she slipped the forged letters beneath it, securing them with a small stone. The letters detailed James's life in Richmond, his marriage to Clara, and his fraudulent claim to veteran benefits, each signed in his unmistakable scrawl. "You're both pathetic," Emily said, standing. "If James saw this, he'd be ashamed of you." The words were a calculated jab, and Margaret's face contorted with rage. "How dare you!" Margaret shrieked, lurching to her feet. Her frail frame shook, and her eyes bulged with fury. "You cursed my son, and now you insult us!" Lily grabbed her mother's arm, but Emily pressed on. "If I'm cursed, then why are you the ones living like pigs without me?" The accusation hit hard, and Margaret clutched her chest, her breath coming in gasps. For a moment, Emily feared she had pushed too far, but Margaret's collapse was brief, her scowl returning as she steadied herself. "Get out," she spat. "You'll regret this." Emily didn't respond. She turned and left the neighbors' curious glances following her as she walked away. Their murmurs praising her courage, questioning Margaret's cruelty, were a quiet victory, but Emily focused on the trap she had set. Back at her cottage, Emily sat with Daniel, her hands trembling as she recounted the visit. "I went to the Carters," she admitted, her voice low. "I had to do something." Daniel's blue eyes searched hers, his brow creased with concern. "What did you do, Emily?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. She hesitated, the truth of her rebirth and her plan too heavy to share. "I stood up to them," she said, her voice steadying. "But I'm scared, Daniel. What if I'm not strong enough to finish this?" He took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "You're the strongest person I know," he said. "Whatever you're planning, I'm with you." His faith eased her fears, and as they planned their wedding set for the following Sunday at the town church, Emily felt her resolve harden. The letters were in place, and soon she would lure James back to Willow Creek, where Colonel Richard Hayes, a war veteran and Daniel's father's friend, would ensure his downfall. The morning of Emily Harper's wedding dawned bright and clear, the Willow Creek church adorned with wildflowers and ribbons. It was August 1952, and the small Bushuo system town buzzed with anticipation, unaware of the storm about to break. Emily stood at the altar in her hand-sewn dress, her heart pounding with joy and apprehension. In her past life, which ended in 1975, she had been betrayed by James Carter, who faked his death to evade the Korean War draft, leaving her to serve his manipulative family for decades. A mysterious voice had granted her rebirth, and now, 6 months after James's supposed death, she was marrying Daniel Brooks, the man she had rejected in her past life. The forged letters she had planted in the Carter house were ready to expose James, but as she exchanged vows with Daniel, her thoughts were on the trap she had set. Handsome in a simple suit, Daniel squeezed her hand, his blue eyes warm with love. The widower who ran the textile mill had lost his wife and daughter years ago, and his quiet strength had drawn Emily to him in this new life. The congregation cheered as the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, but Emily's heart skipped a beat when a shout shattered the moment. Emily! Harper! You're my fiancé! James Carter stormed down the aisle, his face twisted with rage. How could you marry another man? The crowd gasped, many not recognizing the man who had been believed dead for nearly 2 years. James, tanned and healthy, looked nothing like a grieving soldier. Emily had expected this. She had sent a forged letter to James in Richmond, signed with Margaret and Lily's names, claiming Emily was bullying them and marrying another. She knew it would draw him back, unable to resist reclaiming her. She stepped forward, her face a mask of confusion. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. "My fiancé died a hero in the war." The crowd murmured, shocked by her denial. James's eyes widened, his confidence shaken. He had expected tears, apologies, perhaps a desperate embrace. Instead, Emily stood resolute, Daniel at her side. "You know damn well who I am," James shouted, pointing at her. "I'm James Carter, the man you swore to marry. You've been unfaithful running off with him." He jabbed a finger at Daniel, who tensed but remained silent, trusting Emily's lead. The guests whispered, some recalling James's face, others doubting his identity. Emily's heart raced, not with fear, but with the thrill of her plan unfolding. "My James was a brave man," she said, her voice conveying sorrow. "He died saving lives. You look like him, but you're no hero. Why are you here impersonating a dead man?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and James's face reddened with frustration. "I'm not dead," he roared. "I was injured and lost my memory for a while, but I'm back for you, Emily. You can't just marry this mill worker." His words dripped with contempt, but Emily's expression didn't waver. She glanced at Daniel, who nodded slightly, his faith in her unshaken. Then she turned to Colonel Richard Hayes, a grizzled war veteran and friend of Daniel's late father, seated in the front pew. She had ensured his presence, knowing his authority would seal James's fate. "Colonel Hayes," she said, her voice calm, "this man claims to be James Carter, a hero who died. Shouldn't we call the authorities to investigate this fraud?" Hayes stood his presence, commanding silence. His weathered face was stern as he addressed James. "If you're James Carter, you've got questions to answer. The army reported you dead in 51, a hero who fell saving comrades. Yet here you stand, fit as a fiddle. Explain yourself." James stammered, his bravado crumbling. I was rescued after the accident. I was recovering in a hospital, that's all. I didn't mean to disappear." His lie was flimsy, his healthy frame betraying him. The crowd's doubt grew, and Emily seized the moment. "If he's James," she said, "then why didn't he return to his unit? The army takes care of its own." Sounds like desertion to me. The word desertion electrified the room. Colonel Hayes's eyes narrowed, and he gestured to 2 men in uniform at the back. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he said, his voice like gravel. James's face paled, and he turned to Emily, desperation creeping in. "Emily, tell them, we were engaged. You loved me. Say something." But Emily's gaze was cold, her heart steeled by memories of his betrayal, his laughter as she lay dying, his life with Clara built on lies. She shook her head. "I don't know you," she said, her voice final, "but I know a liar when I see one." The crowd erupted in whispers, and James's shoulders slumped as the soldiers approached his fate, sealed by Emily's trap. Daniel's hand found hers, a silent promise of support as the church doors closed behind James, the first step toward justice complete. The Willow Creek church was a cauldron of whispers as James Carter was led away in handcuffs, his face pale and eyes wild with panic. It was August 1952, and Emily Harper stood at the altar beside her new husband, Daniel Brooks, her heart racing with triumph and trepidation. In her past life, which ended in 1975, James had faked his death to dodge the Korean War draft, leaving Emily to serve his manipulative mother Margaret and sister Lily for over 20 years. On her deathbed, she learned he was alive, married to Clara, a nurse who helped stage his accident and mocking her suffering. A mysterious voice had granted her rebirth, whispering of justice, and now 6 months after James's supposed death, Emily's plan was unfolding. She had lured James back to Willow Creek with a forged letter, planted evidence of his desertion in the Carter house, and ensured Colonel Richard Hayes, a war veteran, was present at her wedding to confront him. James's outburst at the ceremony, claiming Emily as his fiancée and accusing her of infidelity, had backfired spectacularly. Emily's calculated denial, pretending not to recognize him, had thrown him off balance, and Colonel Hayes's stern questions about his heroic death had sealed his fate. As the soldiers escorted James out, Emily's gaze met Daniel's, his blue eyes steady with unspoken support. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock and disbelief. "That's James," Carter whispered Mrs. Jenkins, her flour-dusted hands clutching her purse. "He doesn't look dead to me," muttered Mr. Thompson, shaking his head. Emily kept her expression neutral, but inside her heart sang. The trap was sprung, but the real blow was yet to come. Colonel Hayes, his weathered face grim, turned to Emily. "You said there's evidence at the Carter house," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Letters proving he's been hiding." Emily nodded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Under a floorboard in the pantry," she said. "I saw them when I visited last week." It was a lie. She had planted the forged letters herself, mimicking James's handwriting from her past life's desperate attempts to feel close to him. The letters detailed his life in Richmond under the alias John Reynolds, his marriage to Clara, and his fraudulent claim to veteran benefits. Hayes signaled to his men, who left for the Carter house, and Emily's pulse quickened. She had orchestrated this moment, but the stakes were high. James's deception would be exposed if the letters were found, and the Carters' lies would crumble. Margaret and Lily burst into the church, their faces flushed with panic. "You can't do this!" Margaret shrieked, her gray hair falling loose from its bun. "He's my son, a hero! You've got no right!" Lily, her eyes red with tears, pointed at Emily. "She's lying. She's always hated us, trying to ruin our family." The crowd's whispers turned to gasps, but Emily remained calm, her years of pain fueling her resolve. She said, "If I'm lying, let the letters speak," her voice cutting through the chaos. "They'll show who James really is." Margaret's face contorted and she lunged forward, but Daniel stepped in front of Emily, his presence a shield. "Let the truth come out," he said, his voice firm but calm. The crowd nodded their sympathy, shifting toward Emily, the woman who had endured the Carters' cruelty. The soldiers returned within the hour, carrying a tin box from the Carter house. Inside were Emily's forged letters, each one a damning testament to James's desertion. Colonel Hayes opened one, his eyes scanning the page before reading aloud. "Dear Mom and Lily, I'm fine in Richmond. The hero story's working, keep the benefits coming. Clara's pregnant, probably a boy. Emily's too dumb to suspect anything. Burn this." The crowd gasped, and Margaret's face drained of color. Lily stammered, "Those aren't real." "We never saw them, but their panic betrayed them." Hayes read another. "I faked the accident with Clara's help, no draft for me. Keep Emily in line, she'll serve you forever." The words hung heavy, and the crowd's shock turned to outrage. James, still restrained, shouted, "They're fake, I didn't write those." But his healthy appearance, no scars, no signs of injury, undermined his claim of amnesia. Hayes's voice was like steel. "James Carter, you're no hero. You deserted your unit, defrauded the government, and abandoned your fiancé. You'll answer for this." He ordered his men to take James to the county jail for investigation, and the crowd parted as James was led away, his protests drowned by their murmurs. Margaret collapsed into a pew, sobbing, while Lily clung to her tears now genuine. Emily felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. In her past life, their lies had broken her. Now their downfall was her justice. She turned to Daniel, her hand trembling in his. "Did I go too far?" she whispered, the weight of her actions settling in. Daniel shook his head, his voice soft. "You did what you had to. I'm proud of you." His words steadied her, a reminder of the life they were building. As the preacher resumed the ceremony, Emily and Daniel exchanged rings, their vows a promise of love and trust, even as the Carters' world unraveled outside. The golden light of late August filtered through the windows of Emily and Daniel Brooks's cottage, casting warm shadows on the wooden floor. It was 1952 in Willow Creek, Virginia, and the newlyweds sat at their kitchen table, the echoes of their wedding day still resonating. In her past life, which ended in 1975, Emily Harper had been betrayed by James Carter, who faked his death to escape the Korean War draft, leaving her to serve his mother Margaret and sister Lily for decades. A mysterious voice had granted her rebirth. Now, 6 months after James's supposed death, Emily had married Daniel, exposed James's desertion with forged letters, and watched him be arrested at their wedding. The town was abuzz with gossip, but Emily's heart was heavy with the cost of her revenge. She traced the grain of the table, her thoughts tangled with triumph and doubt. In her past life, Daniel had been her quiet supporter, a widower whose love she rejected under the Carters' manipulation. Now his faith anchored her, but the weight of her deception, the forged letters, the orchestrated trap, gnawed at her. She had planned every detail from luring James back with a fake letter to ensuring Colonel Hayes's presence, but the victory felt bittersweet. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." He looked up from his coffee, his blue eyes gentle but searching. "What is it, Emily?" he asked, setting his mug down. She took a deep breath, the truth of her rebirth too heavy to share, but her actions too significant to hide. "I set it all up," she confessed. "The letters James showing up, I planned it. I'm scared you'll think less of me." Daniel's brow furrowed, but he reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I figured you were up to something," he said, a faint smile softening his words. "How you looked at Hayes and how you handled James were too perfect. But I don't think less of you, Emily. You've been through hell, and you fought back. I wish you'd told me sooner." His honesty disarmed her, and tears pricked her eyes. In her past life, she had been too broken to accept his love. Now she feared losing it to her scheming. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Scared I'd fail, or you'd see me as vengeful, not the woman you married." Daniel shook his head, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "You're the strongest person I know. You didn't just survive, you took back your life. I'm with you no matter what." The weight of his words lifted a burden she hadn't realized she carried. Emily squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with gratitude. But her triumph was tested when Margaret and Lily appeared at their door the next day, their faces haggard with desperation. "Emily, please," Margaret begged, dropping to her knees on the porch. "We were wrong to treat you so. But James, he's our boy. You loved him once. Don't let him die." Lily, her eyes red, clutched her mother's arm. "You can save him," she pleaded. "Tell them it was a mistake, that the letters aren't real. We'll make it right. You can even join our family again." Their groveling starkly contrasted their past cruelty, and Emily felt a surge of satisfaction tempered by the memory of her own suffering. She stood in the doorway, her expression cold. "You think I can save him?" she said, her voice steady. "You think I'd want to after what you did?" Margaret's sobs grew louder, and Lily's face twisted with anger. "You're heartless," she spat. "You love James. How can you do this?" Emily's laugh was sharp, cutting through their pleas. "I loved a lie," she said. "James faked his death, left me to your abuse, and laughed while I suffered. And you helped him." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know everything because I've lived it before. I was reborn to make you pay." The words slipped out, a dramatic flourish she hadn't planned, but the shock on their faces was worth it. Margaret's eyes widened, and Lily's mouth fell open, their belief in her curse making her claim seem plausible. "You're a witch!" Margaret gasped, scrambling to her feet. "You cursed my son, and now you're using dark magic to frame him." Emily shook her head, a smile playing on her lips. "Believe what you want," she said, "but the truth is in those letters, and James will answer." She closed the door, their protests muffled as she turned back to Daniel, who had watched silently from the kitchen. "Did you mean that," he asked, his voice cautious, "about being reborn?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "It's true," she said, her voice soft. "But I don't expect you to believe it. Just know I did this for us, for the life we deserve." Daniel pulled her close, his embrace a silent promise. "I believe in you," he said. "That's enough." As Emily rested against him, the Carters' pleas fading outside, she felt her emotional triumph solidify. Her revenge was nearly complete, and with Daniel by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The crisp September air swept through Willow Creek, Virginia, carrying whispers of scandal that clung to the town like morning dew. It was 1952, and Emily Harper, now Emily Brooks, stood in her cottage garden pruning roses as the sun dipped low. Her wedding to the textile mill manager Daniel Brooks had marked a turning point, not just in her heart, but in her quest for justice. In her past life, which ended in 1975, she had been betrayed by James Carter, her fiancé, who faked his death to dodge the Korean War draft, leaving her to serve his mother Margaret and sister Lily for decades. On her deathbed, she learned he was alive, married to Clara, a nurse who aided his deception and mocking her suffering. A mysterious voice had granted her rebirth, whispering of justice, and now 6 months after James's supposed death, Emily's plan had unraveled his lies. Forged letters planted in the Carter house had exposed his desertion at her wedding, leading to his arrest by Colonel Richard Hayes, a war veteran. The town was still reeling from the drama. Once hailed as a hero, James was now a pariah, his healthy frame betraying his claims of injury and amnesia. The forged letters, written in his hand by Emily's practiced skill, detailed his life in Richmond under the alias John Reynolds, his marriage to Clara, and his fraudulent claim to veteran benefits. The investigation had confirmed the truth. James had deserted his unit, forged a death certificate with Clara's help, and lived off government funds meant for fallen soldiers' families. The Carters had received monthly rations, flour, meat, and cash based on James's heroic death, a fraud that now fueled the town's outrage. While pruning her roses, Emily felt a quiet satisfaction, but the cost of her revenge weighed on her. She had confessed her scheme to Daniel, fearing his judgment, but his unwavering support had steadied her. Now, as the Carters faced their downfall, she braced for their final desperate plea. Margaret and Lily appeared at her gate, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. Gone was their usual arrogance. They moved like ghosts haunted by their son's fate. Emily Margaret croaked, her voice breaking as she sank to her knees. "We were wrong. We treated you terribly. But James, he's all we have. Please, you loved him once. Speak to Colonel Hayes. Tell him the letters were a mistake." Lily, clutching her mother's arm, nodded frantically. "You have power, Emily. You can save him. We'll make it right. You can join our family again, be his wife." Their groveling starkly contrasted the cruelty of Emily's past life, where Margaret's slaps and Lily's taunts had broken her spirit. Their desperation was almost pitiful, but Emily's heart was stone. She set down her pruning shears, her gaze cold. "You think I can save him?" she said, her voice low and steady. "James faked his death, lied to the army, and laughed while I suffered. You helped him, kept his secrets, and called me cursed. Why would I lift a finger for any of you?" Margaret's sobs grew louder, and Lily's eyes flashed with anger. "You're a monster," she spat. "You planned this, didn't you? Those letters, you made them." Emily's lips curled into a faint smile. "And if I did," she said, stepping closer, "I've seen things you can't imagine. I lived a life where you destroyed me. This time I fought back." Laced with the truth of her rebirth, her words stunned them into silence. Margaret's eyes widened and Lily's mouth fell open, their superstitious minds grasping at the impossible. "You're a witch," Margaret whispered, scrambling to her feet. "You cursed my son and forged those letters with dark magic." Emily laughed, a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet garden. "Call it what you want," she said, "but the truth is out and James will pay for it." She turned away, signaling the end of their plea, but Margaret grabbed her arm. "If you don't help him, he'll die," she wailed. Emily shook her off, her voice icy. "He died to me the day he left me to your mercy." She walked inside, closing the door on their cries, and leaned against it, her heart pounding. A flicker of doubt tempered the satisfaction of their downfall. Had her revenge gone too far? Daniel, home from the mill, found her there, his blue eyes soft with concern. "They came, didn't they?" he asked, pulling her into an embrace. Emily nodded, her voice muffled against his chest. "I told them I planned it," she said. "I even mentioned my rebirth to scare them. But what if I've become as cruel as they were?" Daniel tilted her chin up, his gaze steady. "You're not evil," he said. "You gave them what they deserved. You're building a life with me, and that's what matters." His words, rooted in his own losses, his wife and daughter taken by illness, grounded her, and she clung to him, her doubts easing. The town's gossip soon turned to the Carters' unraveling. Margaret and Lily, driven by panic, stormed the military base, ranting about Emily's witchcraft and rebirth. "She's evil," Margaret screamed, clawing at an officer. "She framed my son with magic." Their wild claims, echoing Emily's taunt, were dismissed as madness. The officers, citing James's confirmed desertion, advised them to stop hinting at mental instability. When Margaret and Lily attacked, they were restrained and sent to a state psychiatric hospital, their screams of innocence ignored. Clara, James's wife, had fled Richmond upon his arrest, but rumors reached Willow Creek of her tragic end, a car accident while escaping her unborn child lost. The town whispered of Emily as a sorceress, but Daniel's hand in hers silenced the noise. As James awaited sentencing, Emily felt her past life's pain receding, replaced by the promise of a future with Daniel. Winter's first chill settled over Willow Creek, Virginia, in February 1953, dusting the town in frost. Emily Brooks stood outside the county jail, her breath visible in the cold air, her hand resting on the slight curve of her belly. 6 months pregnant, she carried the hope of a new life with Daniel, the textile mill manager who had become her anchor. In her past life, which ended in 1975, she had been betrayed by James Carter, who faked his death to evade the Korean War draft, leaving her to serve his mother Margaret and sister Lily for decades. A mysterious voice had granted her rebirth, and in 1952, 6 months after James's supposed death, Emily had married Daniel, exposed James's desertion with forged letters, and watched his arrest at their wedding. As James faced his final day, she had come to close the chapter of her past life. The jail was a squat gray building, its walls cold and unyielding. Inside, James sat in a cell, his once confident frame gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. The investigation had confirmed his crimes: desertion, fraud, and theft of veteran benefits. The forged letters Emily planted, mimicking his handwriting, had sealed his fate, revealing his life in Richmond with Clara, his accomplice. His sentencing, death by execution, a harsh penalty for desertion in the 1950s, had shocked Willow Creek, but the town's outrage at his fraud justified it. Margaret and Lily, institutionalized after their frenzied claims of Emily's witchcraft, were no longer a threat. Their screams were dismissed as insanity. Clara's death in a car accident had left a bitter aftertaste. Her role as James's enabler had been reduced to a tragic footnote. Emily faced James through the cell bars, her expression calm but resolute. "You're wondering why your mother and Clara didn't come," she said, her voice steady. "Clara fled when you were arrested. She tried to start over, but a car crash took her and your unborn son." James's eyes widened, a flicker of grief crossing his face. "And your mother and sister Emily," continued, "they're in a hospital, strapped down, raving about my curses. They're broken, just like you broke me." James lunged at the bars, his voice hoarse. "Why, Emily? Why did you do this to me?" His desperation was a shadow of the man who had mocked her in her past life, laughing as she lay dying. She stepped closer, her hands still on her belly, a reminder of the life she was building. "Because I lived it," before she said, her voice low and fierce. "I served your family for 20 years, believing I was cursed. You faked your death, left me to their abuse, and laughed when I died. But I was reborn, James. I came back to make you pay." Laced with the truth of her rebirth, her words hung between them. James's face crumpled, whether from belief or defeat she couldn't tell. "You're lying," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Emily shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. "Believe what you want. It doesn't change the truth." She turned away as the guards approached, James's screams fading behind her. Whether he believed her rebirth or not, it no longer mattered. Outside, Daniel waited by their truck, his coat dusted with frost. He took her hand, his warmth cutting through the chill. "You okay?" he asked, his blue eyes searching hers. Emily nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in 2 lifetimes. "I needed to face him," she said, "to end it." Daniel pulled her close, his embrace a promise of safety. "You did," he said. "Now we start fresh." They drove home, the town's whispers fading into the distance. Some called Emily a sorceress, their superstitions fueled by Margaret and Lily's rants, but Daniel's unwavering trust silenced the noise. "I don't care what they say," he told her that night as they sat by the fire. "Reborn or not, you're my wife, and I love you." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, her hand on her belly, feeling the faint kick of their child. Daniel's love had been a light she was too broken to reach in her past life. Now it was her foundation. James's execution marked the end of her revenge, but her new life with Daniel, their unborn child, and the promise of a family was her true triumph. As the fire crackled, Emily felt whole, her past life's pain replaced by a future she had fought for. Willow Creek would talk, but she no longer cared. She had reclaimed her story, and with Daniel by her side, she was ready to write its next chapter.